Are you the kind of person who notices the small things, even over a cafe bell ringing in a sleepy Vermont morning? They mocked the old man's coin at the counter. Quiet laughs, rolling eyes, a soft clink on tile, easy and careless. And he didn't answer. But when a retired Marine colonel spotted the service-marked coin catching the hall lights, the whole room fell into a heartbeat of silence and shame. Still, that little coin would soon make an entire town stand together, quietly rewriting who they thought he was. The bell above the cafe door gave a soft little ring, the kind that slipped easily into the hum of an early Vermont morning. Walter Briggs had been there since dawn, sorting a small stack of envelopes for the post office next door. He liked the quiet before the town woke, liked the way the light touched the chrome napkin holders along the counter. The service-marked coin, 1973, rested in his palm, catching a thin blade of sunlight as he shifted the mail. Ethan Ward, 19, and always moving a bit too fast for the small cafe, slid behind the counter with a half-zipped apron. Kyle Bennett followed, tugging at the sleeves of a hoodie he hadn't bothered to straighten. They were new 3 weeks in, still learning how to steam milk without flooding the place. Ethan spotted the glint first. "Man, what's that?" he said, leaning closer. "Some kind of lucky penny," Kyle laughed under his breath. "Guess the old guy's collecting tokens now." The words weren't loud, but they didn't have to be. They carried that easy confidence of people who hadn't lived long enough to know better. Emily, seated near the window with a muffin she hadn't touched, looked up sharply, her eyes cut from the two boys to Walter, waiting for his reaction. Walter didn't give one. He just tucked the coin back into his breast pocket, thumb brushing the worn edge as if checking it hadn't taken offense. His breath left him in a quiet cloud that the morning light made visible for half a second. Still, he told himself there was no use rising to it. "Morning, Walter," Emily said, trying to lift the mood. He offered her a thin smile. "Morning, kiddo." The door opened again, letting in a gust of cold, and Tom Garrison's irritation with it. Tom was 40-something, broad in the shoulders, and walked with the important heaviness of a man who chaired too many local committees. "You're here early," Tom said to Walter, not bothering to hide the edge in his voice. "Sorting again. You know there's a process for that." Walter folded the envelopes gently, like something that could bruise. "Just lending a hand. They're short this week." "Short doesn't mean sloppy," Tom replied. He moved past Ethan and Kyle, who were suddenly quiet, unsure whether to grin or keep their heads down. Tom adjusted his coat collar, glanced again at Walter, and let out a sigh that felt heavier than the situation called for. Emily frowned at him. "Walter's helping? That's not sloppy." Tom didn't answer. He just placed his order with a stiff nod, keeping his gaze fixed somewhere above everyone's heads. Walter stepped aside to let Emily pass, easing himself onto the stool at the end of the counter. The morning light eased across the room, softening the metallic edges, softening the judgment that still hung faintly in the air. His hand rested on his pocket, where the coin lay warm against the fabric, steady as ever. And for a moment, just a small breath-long moment, the whole cafe softened with him, the hiss of the espresso machine, the clink of cups, the muted chatter of townspeople drifting in. It was too early for confrontation, too early for hurt. But the mark had been mocked, and somewhere beneath the quiet, something unseen had begun to shift. The town's small HOA hall smelled faintly of pine cleaner and old folding chairs. A line of winter jackets hung beside the doorway, dripping meltwater onto the tile as neighbors shuffled in for the monthly meeting. Walter stood near the side wall, hat in hand, trying to make himself smaller than he already felt. He hadn't planned on attending, but Tom had stopped him outside the post office and said it would be best if he came. Ethan and Kyle lingered near the back row, half-slouched, whispering behind their sleeves. They were supposed to be here as part of some community participation requirement. though neither seemed interested in anything beyond avoiding real work. When they caught sight of Walter, their grins returned sharp and careless. Tom cleared his throat at the podium. "Let's begin," he said, tapping the side of a clipboard. "We've had concerns raised about mail handling this week." His eyes slid toward Walter. "Some minor mix-ups, some confusion. And with the holiday approaching, we need order." A few people murmured. Most simply waited. Walter straightened slightly. "If there's been confusion, I can help sort." Tom cut him off. "Yes, well, the issue is that help isn't always helpful. There's a system, and not everyone is suited to it." Ethan bit the inside of his cheek to keep from laughing. Kyle didn't bother. He shook his head and smirked openly. Emily slipped into the room just then, standing near the exit, her backpack still over one shoulder. She caught the tail end of Tom's words and frowned, eyes narrowing on him first, then on the boys behind him. Walter shifted his weight, and the service mark coin, 1973, slipped from his pocket. It hit the floor with the smallest tap, almost nothing. But it echoed just enough in the quiet hall for every head to turn. Kyle stepped forward. "Oops," he said lightly, nudging the coin with his shoe. "Didn't know antiques roll this far." A breathless hush settled over the room. The boys grinned. Ethan folded his arms, leaning back like someone watching harmless entertainment. Emily's face flushed hot with disbelief. Walter bent slowly, more carefully than he needed to. He reached for the coin fingertips, brushing the cool metal. Then, something in the room shifted, the way people watched him, the way stillness seemed to press against the walls. He stood again, holding the coin in his palm, as if reacquainting himself with its weight. No one spoke. Even Tom hesitated, lips pressed thin, as though some part of him realized the moment had tipped into something more serious. But he recovered quickly. "Look," he said, clearing his throat, "this isn't personal. We're simply discussing capability, reliability. The town needs someone more capable." He let the sentence hang unfinished, but understood. Emily took a step forward. "He is capable," she said, voice steadier than her age would predict. "He's been helping for years." "You act like he's making trouble." Tom didn't meet her eyes. "That's enough. This is an administrative matter." Ethan and Kyle exchanged another glance, their smirks returning as if the tension had broken just for them. Walter slipped the coin back into his pocket, smoothing the fabric over it. He didn't argue, didn't defend himself. Instead, he simply looked down at the floor, steady and quiet, as though bracing against a wind no one else could feel. Around him, the meeting moved on agenda items, maintenance notes, discussions about street decorations. Yet the air hadn't fully cleared. Something had been exposed, however, briefly, and though no one said it aloud, everyone seemed to sense it. The misjudgment wasn't fading. It was deepening. The back loading bay of the post office was still half asleep when Walter arrived, the November cold, pulling thin ribbons of mist from the pavement. He moved slowly, stacking small parcels onto a rolling cart, careful with each one as if they might bruise. The sun hadn't fully crested the ridge yet, but the sky held a pale promise of light. Emily's footsteps came lightly down the ramp. She carried a brown paper bag in her hands, warm grease spots blooming through the bottom. "I brought you a blueberry muffin," she said, offering it up like an apology for the entire town. "Mom made too many." Walter smiled, faint but sincere. "That sounds just right." She lingered, watching him sort a few envelopes. "People weren't fair yesterday," she said, voice hushed. "You didn't deserve that." "Well," Walter murmured, adjusting his cap, "folks see what they see. Sometimes they need a little time to see the rest." Before Emily could answer, The scuff of measured footsteps came from the alley beside the bay. A tall, lean man emerged from the shadows. Shoulders straight despite his age, movement slow but never sloppy. His hair was silver and trimmed short, his coat neat, boots laced with the kind of precision that didn't fade after a lifetime. Emily lifted her chin in greeting. "Good morning, Colonel Hale." Walter looked up. The title landed gently but firmly, as if the air itself acknowledged it. Sam Hale nodded once, offering Emily a kind glance before turning his attention to Walter. "Didn't mean to interrupt," he said, voice low and steady. "Just came by to drop off a form. Thought I'd stretch my legs." "No interruption at all," Walter replied. A breeze slipped down the alley, nudging the old porch swing behind the building. It creaked softly back and forth, back and forth. From somewhere near the church hall across the street, a choir rehearsal hummed a scattering of voices, warming up gentle and unhurried. Walter reached into his coat to shift a stack of letters and the service-mark coin. 1973 slid into his hand. Its worn silver caught a sliver of the morning light. Colonel Hale stopped speaking. His gaze latched onto the coin with an intensity that made Emily look up. "Sir," she asked quietly. Hale stepped closer. "May I?" Walter opened his palm. The colonel's fingers brushed the surface, reverent, deliberate. His breath left him in a slow exhale. "Haven't seen this mark in decades." His voice thinned around the edges, softened by something old and unspoken. Walter shifted uneasy. "Just something I kept," he said. But Hale wasn't finished studying it. He angled the coin so the faint engraving caught the morning light, revealing the emblem, the year, the subtle imperfections earned through years of being held rather than displayed. Emily watched the two men, sensing something she didn't fully understand. The choir's distant notes rose slightly, weaving themselves into the cold air like a thin thread of memory. Hale handed the coin back, closing Walter's fingers gently around it. He didn't say anything for a moment. He simply looked at Walter, long and searching, as if fitting together pieces he hadn't expected to find. And something in Colonel Hale's eyes shifted. Veterans Day drew a soft hush over the small town hall auditorium, the kind that settled on people before they even took their seats. Old banners hung from the walls, their colors a little faded, but still proud. Rows of folding chairs filled quickly. Neighbors, church members, retirees, a handful of teenagers who had been told by their parents that attending builds character. Tom stood near the podium, flipping through his note cards, straightening and re-straightening them, as if order on the page would promise order in the room. Ethan and Kyle leaned against the back wall, shuffling awkwardly, trying to look invisible. Walter slipped in quietly through a side door, hoping no one would notice him. He found a seat near the aisle and clasped his hand's coin tucked deep in his pocket. Emily spotted him and waved from a few chairs over. He returned the gesture with a faint smile. A gentle rustle moved through the hall when Colonel Sam Hale entered. He didn't stride or command attention. He simply walked with a steady, unbroken rhythm that made a few people sit up a little straighter without fully knowing why. He took his place near the front, nodding politely to the mayor, then folding his hands behind him. Tom stepped to the podium. "Thank you all for joining us today. The microphone popped, cutting him off. A few people chuckled. Tom forced a smile and adjusted the switch. "We're here to honor service in our community. Before we begin, I'd like to invite Colonel Hale to share a few words." Ethan and Kyle stiffened. They hadn't expected that. Colonel Hale approached the stage slowly, as though measuring each step. When he reached the lectern, he didn't clear his throat or adjust the mic. He simply rested both hands on the wooden edge and scanned the faces before him. Steady, observant, seeing more than he said. "I don't speak often," he began, voice low, warm with age. But today felt necessary. He reached into his coat. The room quieted. Even the children in the front row sensed something shift. In his palm lay the service mark coin, silver worn soft at the edges. This, he said, lifting it slightly, is the service mark coin of 73, issued only once, for quiet courage when no one was watching. A faint gasp came from somewhere near the middle rows. Ethan and Kyle straightened, eyes narrowing as they recognized the shape, the shine, the same coin they had kicked across the HOA meeting floor. Hale continued turning the coin so the etching caught the overhead lights. You don't earn this by talking or by being loud. You earn it by stepping forward when others step back, by serving without expecting applause. Tom shifted uncomfortably. Emily's eyes were wide, her hands tightened around the program in her lap. Walter stared down at his shoes, breath caught somewhere in his chest. Hale paused long enough that even the air seemed to wait. Then he said, "This coin belongs to someone here. Someone who carried it quietly without burdening anyone with what it meant." Ethan swallowed. Kyle's face drained of color. Hale took one step back from the lectern. His posture changed, subtle at first, then unmistakable. His spine straightened, shoulders squared, heels aligned with a precision that hadn't dulled with age. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was instinct, an old reflex rising to the surface. Colonel Hale rose first, quietly, firmly, like an old instinct waking up. And in that instant, as if swept by a tide no one could see, the entire room felt pulled upward. It wasn't force, not really. More like protocol itself pushed the room upright. Tom stood. The mayor stood. The choir members stood. Ethan and Kyle stood, last trembling with realization. Then the entire hall stood as one. Hale held the posture a moment longer, honoring someone the town had overlooked. Then he turned, stepped down from the stage, and walked toward Walter. Each footfall echoed softly across the wooden floor. Walter seemed to shrink into his chair, unsure where to look. Hale stopped in front of him and extended the coin. "You carried this with humility," he said, voice steady but touched with emotion. "And you served this town with the same heart that earned it." A murmur spread across the room. Recognition, shame, admiration. Walter blinked hard. "Sam, you don't have to." "I do." Hale replied gently. "They need to know." He turned again to the crowd. "We honor service today, and sometimes the greatest service comes from the man you overlook at the post office. The one who never complains. The one who keeps showing up." Silence settled deep, reverent. And Walter Briggs, quiet veteran of a chapter no one here knew, felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders like an old uniform he wasn't sure he still deserved. The doors of Town Hall opened with a long wooden sigh, releasing everyone into the cool afternoon air. The sky had shifted to a soft pewter gray, and a gentle breeze carried the smell of damp leaves rolling along Main Street. People spoke in hushed tones, still softened by what they had witnessed inside. Walter stepped out slowly, shoulders slightly hunched as though he hadn't fully shaken off the weight of attention. Emily walked beside him, keeping close without crowding him. Colonel Hale lingered near the steps, speaking with the mayor. His posture relaxed. Now the earlier formality dissolved into something warmer. Ethan and Kyle stood a few yards away, unsure, shifting from foot to foot, like boys caught doing something they finally understood was wrong. When Walter approached, they straightened, exchanging a quick look before stepping forward. "Sir," Ethan began, voice thin around the edges. We didn't know." Kyle nodded, his usual grin nowhere in sight. We're sorry. Truly. Walter studied them for a long moment, not harshly, just with a quiet patience that made both young men fidget. He finally said, "Understanding takes time." His voice carried no resentment, only a kind of tired wisdom. Ethan let out a breath he'd clearly been holding. "We'll do better," he murmured. "I promise." Colonel Hale stepped closer, hands in the pockets of his coat. "Mistakes aren't the end," he said calmly. "They're invitations to grow if you let them." The boys nodded again, grateful, then drifted back toward their families, who pulled them aside with half-whispered questions. A moment later, Tom approached, moving slowly, almost cautiously. The confident briskness he carried earlier was gone. He stopped a few feet from Walter, head in hand, eyes lowered. "Walter." Tom swallowed hard. "I owe you an apology." Walter offered a small, weary smile. "Tom, we all learn at different speeds." Those words landed gently but firmly. Tom looked up, relief mixed with humility. "If you're willing, I'd like to fix what I got wrong." "You already started," Walter replied. Emily slipped her arm through Walter's, her expression bright with pride. "I knew your mark meant something," she said softly. Walter chuckled under his breath. "Most days I wasn't sure it did anymore." "Well," she said, squeezing his arm today, reminded everyone. A cluster of town board members approached, papers clutched against the breeze. One of them, a woman with silver hair pulled neatly into a bun, cleared her throat. "Mr. Briggs," she began. "After what we saw today, the board would like to create a small display in our local history corner. A plaque recognizing your service and the coin, if you'd consider letting us place it there." Emily beamed. Colonel Hale nodded approvingly. Walter blinked, visibly moved. "The coin's not about me," he said quietly. "No," Hale agreed. "It's about what you carried even when no one noticed." Walter hesitated, thumb worrying the edge of his jacket pocket. "All right," he said softly. "If it helps someone understand a little sooner than I did." The board members smiled grateful and stepped away to begin planning. A comfortable pause settled among the four of them. Walter, Emily, Tom, and Hale, like the town itself, had stopped to breathe. The breeze lifted again, tugging gently at Walter's jacket, sending a few leaves skittering across the steps. "Anyway," Hale said after a moment, drawing out the word with a wry grin. "Guess you're the talk of the town now, Walter." Walter laughed, a warm, surprised sound that softened the lines in his face. "Never thought I'd see that day." Emily nudged him lightly. "Some folks take a lifetime to be noticed. Doesn't make their service any smaller." Tom nodded in agreement. If anything he said quietly, it makes it greater. They stood together for a moment, sharing the stillness that comes after something heavy has been set down. The choir's rehearsal drifted faintly from the church hall down the street, a soft rise of voices carried on the wind. Walter looked toward it, letting the sound settle. For the first time in a long while, he felt seen gently, respectfully, without spectacle. And around him, the town that once misjudged him was beginning finally to understand. The post office foyer felt different now. The old brass mailboxes still lined the wall, their hinges creaking in the same familiar way. But something in the quiet space carried a new kind of warmth. Maybe it was the plaque, polished, framed, and hung with fresh screws on the center column, catching the morning light. A mark of quiet service. The words were simple, but the way they rested above the small display case gave them a gentle weight. Inside the glass, the service mark coin of in 73 lay on a dark felt backing, no longer hidden in a pocket or mistaken for a trinket. It seemed to glow in the soft sun that filtered through the foyer windows. Walter stepped closer. hands lightly clasped behind him. He wasn't sure whether to smile or bow his head. The coin looked both familiar and strange now, like a memory made public. Emily entered quietly, carrying a folded piece of paper. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold outside, and her eyes lit up when she saw him standing there. "You came early," she said. "Old habits," Walter replied with a faint grin. "Mail waits for no one." She laughed softly, then held out the paper. "This is for you." Walter unfolded it carefully. It was a handwritten note, neat and earnest. "One day, I hope I earn a mark like yours." He read the line twice, the second time slower. "Emily, this is too kind." "It's honest," she said. "You carried something important with such humility that matters more than people think." Walter looked back at the plaque. "Most days I didn't feel like it mattered at all." "Maybe not to you," she replied gently, "but it mattered to the kind of person you chose to be." Across the foyer, the door opened with a soft jingle. Colonel Hale stepped in, hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. He didn't approach right away, just paused near the bulletin board, taking in the small scene with a quiet smile. Walter noticed him and nodded. Hale nodded back approval, written plainly across his face. Walter exhaled slowly, feeling something settle inside him, a calm he hadn't known he was missing. "Funny," he said, almost to himself, "how a simple mark can change a room." Emily tilted her head, listening. "They mocked it once." Walter continued, eyes drifting back to the display, and a colonel stood for it. And then the whole town followed. Emily's smile deepened. Hale's did too, even from across the room. The words weren't dramatic, but they carried the whole story inside them, its humility, its lesson, its quiet justice. People began trickling in for the day, an elderly couple picking up holiday packages, a teenager mailing a college application, a mother with a toddler tugging at her sleeve. Each paused, even if only for a second, to look at the plaque. Some nodded with a small spark of recognition. Others simply lingered in front of the coin, as if absorbing its story through the glass. Walter stepped aside to give them space. He didn't need to explain anything. The plaque spoke for itself now. Emily slipped her arm through his. "Proud of you," she whispered. Walter shook his head lightly. "Just did what folks taught me a long time ago: serve quiet, stand steady." "And look what it built," she replied. Colonel Hale finally approached. "Ready for coffee, Walter?" "More than ready," Walter said. The three of them headed toward the door, stepping into the crisp morning with an unhurried ease. Behind them, the foyer remained warm and bright. The plaque steady on the wall, the coin resting in the glass like a quiet beacon. And as the door swung shut, sunlight hit the display just right, making the marks shine as if reminding anyone who passed through that a single act of humble service could make a whole town stand. If this story moved you, share it forward. The morning light drifted softly across the post office foyer, warming the new plaque where Walter's service mark coin rested, and he stood there with a kind of quiet gratitude as neighbors passed by with gentle nods, and still each person paused just long enough to feel what the moment carried. He thought about the long years of service no one saw, about the kindnesses given without return, and the way a life like his could shine the way a lamp does in a winter window. Steady, small, but guiding someone home. Then, as Emily joined him and slipped her note into his hand, he felt the truth settle that even the quietest courage leaves a trail behind. "Funny how a simple mark can change a room," he murmured, remembering the day they mocked it, the day a colonel stood, and the day a town rose with him. And in that lingering pause, before he stepped back outside, the echo of that choice stayed bright enough to share forward.